that girls would have shot basketball. But you could have put it at the tennis court, what had been the tennis court.
Well, that's what I think it was where the tennis court was. Today it's a basketball court.
Okay.
Alright, we'll go ahead and
Because Lil
start.
Baxter and I used to go back there and shoot baskets.
704.
Yep.
Go ahead.
704 was built in, let's see, 1921 by my grandparents, Frank G. Baldwin, who was raised in 708, and Carrie Kyle Baldwin, who was raised in 700. So they were neighbors, and they were married in 1913, and they lived in 700 until they built the house in 1921 with her parents and with the Newble family. So Mother and Scrub Newble were close to the same age and more like brothers and sisters than first cousins. And the house was reminiscent of the colonial architect, and I had some other information, and the Historical Society application gave a good description of the house and the doorways and the upstairs windows and things that they thought were quite impressive. So anyway, Mimi and Pop, which is what I called my grandparents, lived with Kyle Baldwin and Frank Baldwin in the 700 until they were built this house. And my mother was born in 700, but her family was living at that time in 704. So, but Mother spent most of her childhood going back and staying in her grandmother's house because it was quiet and calm, and she got a lot of attention there, where she had 2 older brothers and things were going wild. I understood and was always told that when my grandmother had to leave her mother's home, she cried for over a year. So that I'm sure it was a big responsibility to step out at that point, and it was awfully close to feel like you could step back.
You want to tell who her brothers were?
I said it was Kyle Baldwin, Frank Baldwin, and Mother's younger brother was Bob Baldwin. They ran the Baldwin stores after my great-grandfather and my grandfather. And Kyle remained most of the time in Farmville. Frank had stores in North Carolina, and Bob ran the store in Marion for years, Virginia, and then in North Carolina. Mount Airy, I believe, and King. So that was the majority of it, but they all came home often for family events and that type of thing. And my grandfather had Featherfin Farm, which was his hobby and his collection, and he bought extensively along the Appomattox River because he felt like it was important that the river be saved and kept from industry as much as possible because of the value of clean water. Okay, have you got anything to add?
Yeah, the house had 3 dormer windows, and on the inside, Mr. Baldwin in later years put an elevator. It had a porch on one side that was later closed in with windows. And in the backyard, there was a tennis court, which later was turned into a basketball court. The architect of the house was Colonial Revival, and I can't be
Built by Taylor Manufacturing Company.
Yes, that's what I was going to
Jimmy
say.
found that in the old Farmville Hurls, and I thought that was interesting.
Built by Taylor Manufacturing Company, exactly, yes.
In 1921.
You
So
want to tell who the next owners and so on were?
I believe when the estate sold the house, Ms. Glass brought it, and then I believe she sold it to Kathy and Danny Andrews. And they raised their girls there, who probably took my uncle's nice flat tennis court and made a basketball court out of it. It was a grass tennis court. Okay?
Yep. Okay, let's see here.
Right, 704 was my grandparents' home, but as a child I never realized my grandfather grew up at 708 and my grandmother grew up at 700. So they were neighbors, and Caroline Kyle Baldwin and Elizabeth and Frank G. Baldwin. They got married in 1913, and I can remember when we had their 50th anniversary, we had a big write-up in the paper, and things that they put on the brochure, and they were all enthralled that there was 10 cars at the wedding, and 10 cars were in town for the wedding in 1913. And they took, which I thought was hysterical, they took a wedding trip all the way up to New York and back. Went to, I don't remember all the stops, it's written in that thing. My grandmother never liked to travel. She wouldn't even go to Featherfin much. Very few times I remember her leaving the house that far. And maybe it cured her, I don't know. But the mother had the duster jackets, that they had white coats that they had to drive. I think if we took a trip in a car in 1913 to New York, we might not leave home again either. She was, they built it, they had 4 children. Frank Baldwin, Kyle Baldwin, who took over the Baldwin stores most of my life. Frank had a store in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. Bob Baldwin, mother's youngest brother, had stores in, first he went to Marion, and then to Pilot Mountain and down in that area of North Carolina. And they had, mother was the only, I realized, now it's funny how you look at it different. Mother was the only granddaughter, and mother liked being at your house. Her grandmother was there. Her grandmother was widowed in September, and mother was born in November. And her grandmother would, and she had 2 older brothers who probably were 6 and 4, and things were wild at her house, which was not mother's style. And mother would go spend the night at her grandmother's. And she said if she was scared at night, her grandmother had a cot at the foot of the bed, and she'd flip her blankets and her pillow and hold on to mother's hand and stay there. So mother loved that place. Even when mother was ill at the end of her life, she told the caretakers that she was at her grandmother's house. And I said, oh good, because you hated that downstairs bedroom that we built as the hospice room. And you hated being there, and I'm so glad you're at your grandmother's house now, because she thought she was, because that's where she wanted to be. And that house had, at that point, Scrub's family, then Martha King, the youngest daughter, lived there her whole life, and with her husband and her mother, I guess. And then her father died, that grandfather died before mother was born, so her grandmother was newly widowed and ready to take care of the baby. But the story is that when Frank and Carrie Baldwin built the house, my grandmother cried for a year that she had to leave her mother's house. So that was interesting. That I thought, well, she went a long way. It's not like she couldn't help it. It's just, you know, and they said she cried for a year. It was just devastating to her to have to move. But if somebody else was running the whole house, I might understand. It could have been really nice. Because they had lived 6 or 7 years and had 2 of their children there in that house, in the 700 house. So, and they all grew up very much together. And it was a whole crew of kids that age that grew up on High Street at that time. White Shields and Kyle and Frank and Mother White and Scrub and Mother were within few months of each other in the birthday, so they were the trio that grew up there, and we're lifetime friends. The house, when at some point, probably when Frank and Kyle and all that, they had a grass tennis court in the back, which Kathy on there had y'all set into a basketball court. That is, you could see the indenture in the thing, huh?
I thought we raised basketball players.
I know.
And then softball
Who
players.
was
They
gonna play
destroyed the front yard.
grass tennis? Who was going to play grass tennis?
Right.
And, but they, all of them, that section were amazingly related, and that's when I said we need to put this in writing, because as many times as I heard Jimmy tell the story of all the other people on High Street, I get them confused. And so I said, let's set up who's who on this. And then you go up to Lucky Bug's house, and the next house was Mother's paternal grandparents, Baldwins, that moved in from Caserta, but we'll get to that later. So, but this, I'm sure I've left out some features on this. In the Historical Society's thing, it wrote up that house is, I don't know if I can find the notes on it, but having very special architecture. And maybe you put it on your note thing, you're saying I didn't read it, but the architecture, the door, the dormers and all that. And I was thrilled to hear that Taylor Manufacturing Company built it. I did not know that, so I thought, well, that's great, which probably would have been my father's father running it at that point. So.
Carolyn, you mentioned Caserta.
Excuse me?
You mentioned Caserta.
Caserta, yes.
Is that the house over in Kerrsville?
The house in Kerrsville was where R.A. Baldwin lived, and R.A. Baldwin had 12 kids, one died in infancy. And I'll tell you more about that, because I thought that was a pretty amazing family. And most of them, a lot of them stayed on High Street. And the girls, the boys were out running stores all over around the state in North Carolina. So, we'll get to that at the next house, but they did come from Caserta. And that was their home. And there were two sisters out there, which were the Baldwin sisters, which I always thought was a little odd, the Baldwin sisters from Buckingham. Yeah, I was too young to remember them. I used to ride out with people and they'd point them out and say that to me. I connected with them more with the Waltons.
Yeah.
With the Baldwins.
Somehow I believe you kid the Earl Handler.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, I'm on the right house, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kathy, would you like to say a few words?
I don't know, I'm here to learn something.
Okay.
I can tell you, we destroyed a perfectly gorgeous bluegrass lawn when the girls moved in and played softball with the entire neighborhood and played on it.
But that's where it was supposed to be.
And
I don't think those boys didn't do it either.
And then we had to put in the basketball court in the back because.
Save the front lawn.
Right, right. And then I had grandsons who took that over, so. Les had some ideas when we moved in about things that needed to happen inside. We didn't tear anything out, we added. But,
I always wondered, did your girls stay in the big room with the attic,
we
which I assume
actually
they put the
divided
rooms?
that big room into two.
Oh, that's a smart idea, that's
So
a great
so
idea.
Annie and Elizabeth stayed up there. And your mom came while we were doing it.
Oh,
And she
okay.
said, and this was my room.
Which one
That
was
was the
that?
room that was Lauren's. And she, but she didn't stay there very much.
No,
That's what
she
told me.
didn't.
She said, I stayed at my grandmother's house.
That's right.
This was my room, but I don't like.
Was it on the back of the house?
That
By
was
the
the bedroom
sunroom?
in the back, right before what was the sleeping porch.
Yeah, the sleeping porch or something, okay. I didn't even know that.
But that, I don't know who enclosed that. Somebody closed that.
It was enclosed when I stayed there. I stayed there for about a year and a half.
I knew you did.
After my grandmother died, Pop had so often that he couldn't get out of a chair. So he would eat at Kyle's house or our house and then pick me up, or then I would go in and I stayed till I got up, went to school. I ate supper at home, I got up, went to school. It was hard when I wasn't studying properly and he watched TV and I couldn't. He had one of the first color TVs around too because he was stuck in a chair.
And
So I just really went to watch the color TV, and I'd sit on the steps. Still wasn't studying, but I'd sit on the steps and listen to the TV.
And I don't know when that side porch was enclosed.
It was enclosed most of my life.
I always thought it was open, and then Jimmy sent that picture.
Sent the picture, there is a picture somewhere, but I sent some of the photo albums when I trying to move to other houses and I couldn't get up with it. But there is a picture of Mimi and Pop standing by a tree by that, and I don't know whether it was closed or not at that time.
Because it's just a towel, like.
Yeah, it
like
was
the
a
front
porch.
wall
It was
used to be.
porch, yes.
So I just flopped the porch
Is
on.
that the house that is glass man?
Yes.
It was the first houses in Farmville that was a bed and breakfast
Mhm.
type house. And she had a lot of college students and would come on weekends to Longwood
Yeah.
and the city. So they stayed at her home.
That's right.
We have some pictures of this place.
Yeah.
Okay,
Kathy, that's on the elevator room. From one
maybe
of the old stores, I'm sure you.
some of y'all that might
You
not
have the elevator,
know
it's not in the
Kathy.
house.
No, you couldn't have it.
Here,
It was
there's
better to
that
keep it
name.
come down on the child.
Right.
I'll back up here a little bit. That's a picture of High Street in the 1920s. And we think, again, that's Henry Newell. Okay. So there's a picture, current day picture. Another current day picture. We worked on this during the summer, and a lot of the days we took pictures where the trees were kind of covering up some of the houses. There's a house, and we've done a lot of talking about this little side porch here. In one picture I'll show you, it was not enclosed. Kathy, I was going to ask you, who put this fire escape on?
We did.
Okay,
It was a little scary putting the girls up there.
yes. Tell us about the whole upstairs. Is that one big room, or is
It
it?
was one big room
Okay.
and a bathroom behind it, but, you don't put two girls really close to the same age in the same room together if you can help it. So
It was making our family. We had to walk through one room to get to the other.
we divided it and made 2 bedrooms up there, and it's nice. They said it's always hot in the summer and always cold in the winter, because nothing got far enough.
One other interesting thing that I heard along the way was, you said that there was at one point a elevator.
Yeah, when my grandfather got off Riddick, he went to some elevator that one of the old stores had and put it in the house. And so I could get him up and get him into the elevator upstairs and then get him to his bedroom.
And y'all had it
And
removed.
Ms. Glass used it, I understand.
She did.
Moved the laundry up and down the steps.
Did she?
for Taking care of all those
That
little
makes
girls
sense.
she boarded. But we took, I mean, as Caroline said, it was
Hang
just
flat down.
sitting on the floor in the front hall and it went up. And
Just one
then
of
there
those.
was nothing there. So
Gotcha.
it was kind of dangerous.
My grandfather had a tendency to use what he had.
Well.
And he
and
had that in the
been
stores
dangerous,
and he
but-
used that. He also had pipes that feather fin that did figure eights and dances under the sink because he used the pipes he had. He did not want to go get them. He liked to use what he
If you
had.
got it, wasn't it?
That's right. He wouldn't go out and buy it.
So let's move along here, another picture. This was a picture taken by the Historical Society in 1985. And you can notice that the shrubbery has changed compared to
It's
today.
like that, whatever.
So a lot of the shrubbery had been, big shrubs were removed and put in new shrubs.
They weren't removed that, whatever that was that came
Blight.
through when it
Blight.
did, and just
Killed.
got the boxwood.
Mm.
It
And the yew tree just got
It was
overwhelmed, I'm
just-
sure.
was
Yes.
Again, that picture. Here's a picture with the snow, 1923, the picture's dated. And you can see what the porch looked like, and then there it is when it left, closed in today. And we don't know at what point it was closed in. But, and again, who do we think that child is, or do we know?
I think that's Henry Buell.
again.
I believe his daughter sent me some of those pictures.
And his mother was a bug,
Was Martha King.
Martin King Bug's child.
There's some kind of shutters on the front.
Yes.
There used to be shutters on the front windows and they've been removed.
Well, it seems in this picture, all the shutters are closed to keep the heat in the house.
Yeah, that big George's, that entranceway was never warm. And the ceilings were so high.
So, in the warm weather pictures, the shutters were open. You may notice that in some of the other pictures. February of 23. I'll quickly show you the other pictures. In that picture with the little hot dog, there's the scooter. You can see the house in the background there. There's a house under construction by a Taylor Manufacturing Company. 21, 22, I believe. There's another picture with it in the background under construction. And again, we think that child is who?
I'm not sure.
No.
That seems to be who most of them are. I don't see Baldwin in any of them. They must not have taken a picture.
They didn't have a
You
camera.
notice there were none of the older boys or mother in any.
Yeah. There again, too, that's probably Martha King Bud and her child, and you can see them working on the house, 706.
They used to have a 700. They used to have a real nice spring
There-
porch.
There's a good picture of the house being constructed and the boys up close there. You have any idea who they are? Before your time, what you Henry Hubbard.
Across the street.
Okay.
So their house, we need to date that for next year.
Yes.
So we can date when they were next door,
And was
straight
that,
across.
was that some of Curtis Hubbard's descendants?
That was Henry Hubbard, yeah.
Henry.
He was I guess Henry was the older brother.
Okay.
Henry and his father used to live in Mount in 802's basement apartment.
And to answer your question, Kathy, I thought this is what I had. F.G. Baldwin had left the contract for the new home on High Street next to Jewel Watkins Taylor Manufacturing. And that was dated 1921. And then the following year, this second one appeared and saying it's nearing completion. So that pretty much dates your house. And Kathy told me before the meeting that she had a set of blueprints, and they were dated 1926.
21.
21,
They
okay.
just thought it was 26.
Okay, there we go. And they're the automobiles, and again, I'm still thinking they're about 1930, late 20s, early 30s. So now we're going to talk about Mr. Baldwin. Both of these are F.G. Baldwin, and that was your grandfather. He was a man who used the elevator. See, I'm confused.
He ran Baldwin's store after his father, R.A. Baldwin.
All right, R.A. Baldwin on the left had the store in Birdsville.
He started his store in Burnsville and then he came to Farmville. He was successful first, went back and farmed, got enough money and came back. And then ran the store. Started the original Baldwin's was in Farmville
And F.G. ran it here for a while.
for most of his life.
Most of his life. And then he turned it over to his son.
Now,
Kyle is the one that most of us would remember running the Baldwins during our lifetime. So all the people associated with that house were associated with the Baldwins department store. And there's F.G. 1964. And I'm assuming that picture was taken in that house.
yes.
Okay.
Those doors went to the side porch.
Okay, that's
And
the
the
side,
fireplace was right there.
side porch
It
door.
was very drafty.
Hey, like I one time it was 5 different storefronts, and Baldwin's was in the middle of those 5, right here. And there was 2 stores on each side. Over the years, Baldwin's kept buying the neighboring store, till they had all 5 of them in a row. And then Kyle Baldwin was running at that time, and he hired his brother-in-law, who would be Caroline's father, right? To put all new front on the whole building.
I didn't know Daddy did that.
Yes, I think he did. So it's all connected in the family, that's what I'm getting at. But anyway, there's the original Baldwins right there. And one of these stores along here was one of the early drug stores we did a report on some years ago. When I was young, that's what Baldwins looked like. And of course, those are 50-mile cars. Kyle was running. He later got this building, and then they put that whole big front all the way down, which you'll see here. There's what it looked like in 1967. They were putting down a new main street, and that picture was taken. And here's a 1960s photo again showing it solid front, covering up all those old storefronts. And there's what it looks like today, green front now, occupies. And when you go in, you're walking in between walls. You can see how they cut through the walls and connected all 5 stores into one big place. That was the F.G. Baldwin operation. This was printed in 1935 in Farmville-Prince and in a book Mr. Wall wrote. And at that time, it looks like they were running 4 Baldwin stores, Farmville store, Lynchburg, North Carolina, and Rocky Mountain. And we know they had a, what was the one out near Whitfield? Marion, Virginia was
It
involved.
was Powder Mountain, Mount Airy, and Durham, and Rocky Mountain, North Carolina, that I know of. The second one was on Cole Street in Old Richmond.
Okay.
But we need to keep moving, Jenny. We've been an hour.
I know. So Mr. Baldwin here tried to give each son a store, right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. This is Caroline's mom and dad,
I believe that was their wedding day.
and that was taken in front. You can see 704 right
They
there.
got married in that house.
And she was a Baldwin, okay? And she was a descendant from the Bugs.
Kyle's mother, her mother was Mrs. Buck. Her mother was the step. Mr. Buck married a woman with a child, and that was her mother,
Okay. So connected to the Bugs.
connected to the Bucks.
Okay. And this is Ms. Glass, right here. Does anybody know what Ms. Glass, did she work for Longwood?
No, she owned a house over on South Main where the dogs are now.
Right
And
across.
when they tore those down, is when she moved here.
In 1969, right across from where Pino's is
Yeah.
now, she
Right.
lived. And Longwood was taking all that whole neighborhood and turning those houses down to build the high-rise dorms. So Ms. Glass needed to move, and I guess this house was available and she bought it. This was her daughter, Margaret, and Margaret supplied the pictures here. And this is, again, Margaret. When she got married, evidently they got married in the house. So that is part of her wedding picture. Does that look like the right house, Kathy?
Except the wallpaper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Change the wallpaper. Here's a picture taken in the 60s when Miss Glass lived there. There's a picture of the backyard. And there's another picture taken from out front. Miss Glass supplied that picture.
I think she moved the garage to the back too, there's a garage behind the house.
Yeah, there was no garage in that
They
house.
put that back.
I'm not sure, I need to ask my aunt, because I'm not sure my grandmother ever drove. I remember my other grandmother getting in and out of the car, but I don't remember my Baldwin grandmother driving.
So, you and Danny bought the house after Miss Glass from, in about what year did y'all move there?
We moved in 84.
84, right.
83 and moved in the winter of 84.
Okay. We'll take about a 10-minute intermission. We got homemade cookies in the back. Will you cut the lights on in the kitchen so they can look at those pictures if they want? We'll convene back in 10 minutes or so, and we'll talk about the last two L's and wrap it up. So, cookies and everything in that bathroom back there, just help yourself. You got plenty of them.